They're destroying the blood of our country. That's what they're doing. They're destroying our country. They don't like it when I said that, and I never read Mein Kampf.
Fascism is not an epithet, and it's not an insult. It's a specific historical phenomenon with identifiable characteristics. Mussolini perverted a democratic unification movement and violent authoritarianism. Hitler refined that model into industrialized genocide. Here are the 10 defining characteristics of historical fascism. Ultranationalism and blood and soil ideology, violent suppression of opposition, scapegoating of minorities and others, fusion of state and corporate power, control of information and attacks on the press, rewriting of education and history, cult of personality and the strongman, rejection of democratic norms and institutions, glorification of violence and militarism, and nostalgia for a mythical golden age. Let's examine Trump and the MAGA movement against each of these 10 characteristics.
They're bringing drugs, they're bringing crime, they're rapists.
And the crime, and the gangs, and the drugs that have stolen too many lives and robbed our country of so much unrealized potential. This American carnage stops right here and stops right now. We must protect our borders from the ravages of other countries making our products, stealing our companies, and destroying our jobs. I will fight for you with every breath in my body, and I will never, ever let you down. From this day forward, it's going to be only America first.
And number 1, ultranationalism and blood and soil ideology. This is perhaps the clearest parallel. Trump's entire political brand is built on the slogan, America First, not as a policy preference for prioritizing American interests, which every nation does, but as an explicit rejection of international cooperation and multilateral institutions. His 2017 inaugural address painted America as a victim of the world. But it goes deeper than economic nationalism. Trump has consistently defined who counts as real Americans in ways that echo Mussolini's approach. Trump's political rise began with the birtherism controversy, the insistence that Barack Obama, despite being born Hawaiian, couldn't really be American because of his father's Kenyan heritage and his middle name. The subtext was clear: real Americans look a certain way and have certain backgrounds. Trump's campaign announcement in 2015 framed Mexican immigrants as rapists and criminals. Throughout his presidency, Trump described black majority cities like Baltimore as rat and rodent infested and disgusting. He told 4 congresswomen of color, 3 of whom were born in the United States, to go back to the countries they came from. When white supremacists marched in Charlottesville chanting "Jews will not replace us" in 2017, Trump said there were very fine people on both sides. The replacement rhetoric is particularly telling. Trump has amplified claims that Democrats are intentionally importing immigrants to replace native-born Americans and dilute their political power. This is the exact same narrative Mussolini used about foreign races weakening Italian culture. It's not about immigration policy, it's about defining the nation in ethnic and racial terms. Number 2, violent suppression of opposition. Trump has consistently encouraged violence against opponents and critics, even offered to pay legal fees for supporters who assaulted protesters. And when his supporters chanted "Send her back" about Congresswoman Ilhan Omar, he let it continue. Most significantly, on January 6, 2021, after months of falsely claiming that the 2020 election was stolen from him, Trump directed his supporters to march on the Capitol. What followed was a violent assault on the seat of American democracy, with his supporters attacking police officers, breaking into the building, and attempting to stop the constitutional process of certifying electoral votes. Trump watched it unfold on television for hours before telling them to go home, and even then, he told them, "We love you, you're very special." The first thing Trump did in his second term in office was pardon the J6 insurrectionists. The message was clear. If you commit crime for Trump, Trump will pardon you. He has since made ICE into his own paramilitary force. Stephen Miller has publicly assured ICE agents that they can act with impunity. But there's more direct parallel to Mussolini's black shirts that deserves examination. Trump's use of federal forces as a tool of political intimidation. These agents, wearing military-style gear but lacking clear identification, detain protesters in unmarked vehicles and use violent tactics against crowds. Trump has sent federal forces to Democratic-led cities, framing urban areas as war zones that local officials were too weak to control. American citizens have been murdered in the streets. Trump has recently deployed federal troops and agents to cities like Minneapolis, Minnesota, Washington, D.C., Los Angeles, and Portland, Oregon, ostensibly to assist ICE with immigration enforcement. In September 2025, National Guard troops were sent to Portland, Chicago, and Memphis over the objections of Democratic mayors, a pattern of federal force overriding local Democratic authority. The pattern is clear. Federal force is being used in cities that didn't vote for Trump over the objection of local officials, targeting populations that the president scapegoated throughout his political career. ICE raids under Trump have increasingly resembled paramilitary operations, armed agents conducting mass arrests, separating families, detaining people in conditions that international observers have compared to concentration camps. The detention facilities at the border, where migrant children were separated from parents and held in cages, where people lack basic sanitation and medical care, where deaths have occurred. These are detention camps with conditions that international observers have compared to concentration camps. They're places where people are concentrated based on their ethnicity and nationality, held in dehumanizing conditions as a deliberate deterrent. When Trump describes immigrants as animals who are poisoning the blood of the country and then deploys federal forces to round them up, the historical parallel becomes impossible to ignore. This isn't yet Mussolini's black shirts beating opposition politicians in the streets, but it's the use of federal force as a political weapon, targeting populations that have been scapegoated and dehumanized in defiance of local democratic authority. It's state violence used to terrorize vulnerable populations to send a message about who has power. Number 3, scapegoating of minorities and others. Trump's political strategy has consistently relied on identifying groups to blame for America's problems, presenting them as both inferior and threatening. Immigrants, particularly from Latin America and Muslim-majority countries, have been Trump's primary targets. Beyond calling Mexican immigrants rapists and criminals, Trump implemented a Muslim ban in his first administration that targeted travelers from several Muslim-majority nations. He described asylum seekers as an invasion and claimed without evidence that they included Middle Eastern terrorists. He separated migrant children from their parents as a deliberate deterrent policy. He described immigrants as poisoning the blood of the country, language that directly echoes Nazi rhetoric about racial purity. Trump has falsely claimed that Haitian immigrants in Ohio were eating people's pets, amplifying racist stereotypes to stoke fear and outrage. He has described predominantly black urban areas as hellscapes and routinely conflates blackness with criminality and disorder. When protests against police brutality erupted after George Floyd's murder in 2020, Trump described protesters as thugs and threatened to deploy the military against them. He staged a photo op in which peaceful protesters were violently cleared from Lafayette Square so he could hold up a Bible in front of a church. The pattern is consistent. Identify a minority group, exaggerate or fabricate threats they pose, used them as an explanation for social problems, and promised to protect the real Americans from them. Number 4, fusion of state and corporate power. Trump did not nationalize industries or create the kind of formal corporatist structure Mussolini built. However, Trump consistently used state power to reward corporate allies and punish corporate critics. Trump twice delivered a massive tax cut that overwhelmingly benefited corporations and the wealthy. He gutted regulations on business across sectors. He appointed corporate executives and lobbyists to lead agencies meant to regulate their industries. For example, the Environmental Protection Agency was led by a former coal lobbyist, and the Labor Department was led by a corporate lawyer who fought worker protections. More telling is how Trump wielded power against corporations that crossed him. He threatened to revoke ABC and NBC's broadcasting licenses over critical coverage. He tried to block the AT&T-Time Warner merger because CNN, owned by Time Warner, covered him negatively. He attacked Amazon because its CEO, Jeff Bezos, owned the Washington Post, which also investigated Trump. Trump also threatened John Deere with tariffs if the company moved manufacturing to Mexico. Trump's economic vision isn't about free markets or worker power. It's about using state authority to reward loyalty and punish disloyalty. The measure of a corporation isn't its innovation or service to consumers, but its relationship to Trump.
We are not going to let the fake news tell us what to do.
Very fake news. You're dishonest people.
The dishonest media.
Your organization
You are attacking the fake media.
CNN's fake news. I don't take
sir,
questions.
if
I don't
you're
take
gonna call us
questions
fake
from
news,
CNN. That was just fake news by NBC, which gives a lot of fake news. It's frankly disgusting the way the press is able to write whatever they want to write.
Number 5, control of information and attack on the press. Trump has not shut down newspapers or imprisoned journalists. The American press remains free in the legal sense, but he has waged an unprecedented assault on the legitimacy of independent journalism. He's called the press the enemy of the people, language borrowed directly from Stalin. He has described negative coverage as fake news, training his supporters to reject any information that contradicts him. He has threatened to revoke broadcasting licenses and changed libel laws to make it easier to sue news organizations. He has encouraged violence against journalists. At his rallies, supporters have harassed and threatened reporters in attendance. His attacks extend beyond news coverage to entertainment that mocks him. He's threatened to investigate NBC over Saturday Night Live's satirical portrayal of him, suggesting the network should face consequences for comedy sketches. He similarly attacked late-night hosts Jimmy Kimmel and Stephen Colbert, suggesting that their shows amount to illegal campaign contributions or should face FCC scrutiny. The message is clear. Not just news coverage, but any public mockery or criticism could bring federal retaliation. This is the mindset of an authoritarian who cannot tolerate criticism in any form. He has lied at a scale unprecedented in American politics. The Washington Post documented more than 30,000 false or misleading claims during Trump's first administration. When fact-checked, he simply doubles down and attacks the fact-checkers. Truth becomes whatever Trump says it is. Bezos' Washington Post discontinued its fact-checker of Trump before the start of the second administration, a sign of the growing corporate complicity to Trump's fascist project. His relationship with Fox News resembles state media more than independent journalism. The network frequently coordinates with his administration, promotes his narratives uncritically, and its hosts advise him on policy and political strategy. Most significantly, he's created an alternative information ecosystem where his supporters trust nothing except sources that affirm what Trump says. Number 6, rewriting of education and history. Trump created the 1776 Commission explicitly to counter teaching about racism in American history. He threatened to cut federal funding to schools that use the 1619 Project, which is a historical examination of slavery's central role in American development. Trump banned diversity training in federal agencies, calling it divisive, anti-American propaganda. His attacks on higher education have been even more direct and threatening. He has repeatedly targeted Harvard and other elite universities, threatening to revoke their tax-exempt status and cut federal funding over how they handle campus protests. He has demanded universities eliminate diversity, equity, and inclusion programs, framing them as discrimination against white students. He has threatened funding cuts to universities that allow certain speakers or curriculum he deems anti-American. He has also threatened to ban or severely restrict Chinese students from American universities, framing them as national security threats and potential spies, a sweeping ethnic generalization that would deny educational access based on nationality. Some universities have capitulated to these threats, shutting down DEI offices and restricting campus speech. Others have resisted, but the pressure is constant and escalating. This represents direct federal interference in university autonomy, using the threat of financial ruin to dictate what can be taught, who can speak, who can study, and what values institutions can promote. It's not just about individual curriculum decisions, it's about bringing higher education under ideological control through economic coercion and ethnic exclusion. Republican officials aligned with Trump have pushed laws banning critical race theory in schools, a term they've expanded to mean virtually any teaching about systemic racism or historical injustice. Books about LGBTQ people and racism have been banned from schools across Republican-controlled states. Florida's Don't Say Gay law and its restrictions on teaching about racism are examples of this trend. Trump has promoted a nationalist mythology of American history, one where the nation's founding was purely noble, westward expansion was manifest destiny rather than genocide, and systemic racism is a lie invented by the left. He has described attempts to teach accurate history as a form of child abuse. This isn't yet the total control of education that Mussolini achieved, but the direction is clear. Suppress teaching that complicates nationalist mythology, ban materials that humanize marginalized groups, use federal funding as a weapon to enforce ideological conformity, exclude students based on ethnicity and nationality, and frame education as indoctrination whenever it contradicts Trump's narrative.
You were betrayed and arrested and falsely accused. It's a familiar pattern that our Lord and Savior showed us. But it didn't end there for him, and it didn't end there for you. God always had a plan. On the third day, he rose, he defeated evil, he conquered death, hell, and the grave. And because he rose, we all know that we can rise. And sir, because of his resurrection, you rose up. Because he was victorious, you were victorious. And I believe that the Lord said to tell you this. Because of his victory, you will be victorious in all you put your hand to.
I could stand in the middle of Fifth Avenue and shoot somebody and I wouldn't lose any voters, okay? It's like incredible.
I got a chance to talk to a group of women who support the president, who made their own church, which say, Jesus is my savior, Trump is my president, and directly on the back of their shirts it says, he is the chosen one.
Communists, Marxists, fascists, and the radical left thugs that live like vermin.
They're destroying the blood of our country. That's what they're doing. They're destroying our country. They don't like it when I said that. And I never read Mein Kampf.
The man that I worship is also a convicted felon.
I think God chose him to get this country right, get us back on our feet, and get us back with the Lord like we need to be.
Christians, get out and vote just this time. You won't have to do it anymore. 4 more years, you know what? It'll be fixed. It'll be fine. You won't have to vote anymore, my beautiful Christians. I love you, Christians. I'm a Christian. I love you. Get out. You got to get out and vote. In 4 years, you don't have to vote again. We'll have it fixed so good you're not going to have to vote. I don't think you're going to have another election in this country if we don't win this election.
Make this one for Jesus, okay? Make this one for Jesus. That's what I tell them. That's would be a damn good thing.
She looks down with contempt on the hard-working American, saying that ignorance is pervasive in many parts of this country.
on a spiritual note, Jesus was also found guilty, and everybody still loves Jesus, feel me? You know what I mean? So, like, if Trump is found guilty, doesn't mean that we still love him. We already know that's that radical left cheat code stuff.
Even if they put him in the jail cell, we still going for him.
Allen harvest and all the type of this. Like, this is just gonna be the cherry on top that sets off either the Civil War, World War III, if he actually get arrested. It'll be the cherry on the top.
Now, if I don't get elected, it's going to be a bloodbath for the whole. That's going to be the least of it. It's going to be a bloodbath for the country. That'll be the least of it. I'm calling on Crooked Joe, corrupt Attorney General of New York, deranged Jack Smith, bird brain. Nikki becomes president. They're poisoning the blood of our country. They're not humans. They're not humans. They're animals. They ought to release the J6 hostages. They've suffered enough. Their comments are helping to fuel the rise of a dangerous, militant hard left.
Jesus was arrested and murdered by the Roman government.
If you don't use certain rhetoric, if you don't use certain words that maybe are not very nice words, nothing will happen.
Somebody said to me the other day, "You're the most famous person in the world by far." I said, "No, I'm not. No, I'm not." They said, "Yes, you are." I said, "No." They said, "Who's more famous?" I said, "Jesus Christ."
Number 7, cult of personality and the strongman. This might be the single clearest parallel. Trump's entire political identity is built on the idea that only he can fix America's problems. His supporters wear his name on hats and shirts, fly flags with his image, display golden statues of him at political conferences, and describe him in quasi-religious terms. He demands absolute loyalty from everyone around him. Officials who criticize or refuse to carry out his wishes, no matter how illegal, are labeled traitors and driven out. He cannot tolerate anyone who won't treat him as infallible. He describes himself as above the law. He claimed he could shoot someone on Fifth Ave and not lose supporters. He argued in court that a president could not be prosecuted for any crime committed while in office. He claimed absolute immunity for any action taken as president, and the Supreme Court agreed with him. He has refused to comply with subpoenas, blocked witnesses from testifying, and described all investigations of him as illegitimate witch hunts. At rallies, they chant his name. They believe his claims that any negative information about him is fabricated by enemies. They view criticism of Trump as criticism of themselves. The MAGA movement isn't organized around principles or policies that could outlive Trump. It's organized around him personally. When he lost the 2020 election, millions of his supporters believed his claims that it was impossible for him to lose legitimately. The cognitive dissonance of Trump losing was so unbearable that they convinced themselves democracy itself must have failed.
Trump is still your president!
It's legal for them to count votes in Pennsylvania 2 days after the election on November 3rd?
Yes.
You're wrong. Go. I don't even want to talk to you.
I believe that Donald Trump won the election. I believe that they tried to steal the election.
The ballots that you said you saw are lying around the place or in trash cans or whatever, where are you hearing that from?
I mean, the videos are going viral everywhere. I've seen them on TikTok. I've seen them on Facebook. I've seen them on Fox News. I've seen them on the local news around my area.
I've seen too much pieces of different evidence so far that shows that at this point I would be okay with a revote.
Really?
Yeah, absolutely.
Number 8, rejection of democratic norms and institutions. This is the most dangerous parallel. Trump has demonstrated consistent contempt for democratic processes whenever they constrain him. He refused to commit to accepting the election results in 2016, which he won. After winning, he falsely claimed he actually won the popular vote and that millions voted illegally. He created a commission to investigate voter fraud, which disbanded without finding evidence because there was none. In 2020, Trump spent months before the election claiming it was rigged. After losing, he insisted he actually won in a landslide. He pressured state officials to find votes. He pressured the Justice Department to declare the election corrupt. He pressured his vice president to illegally reject electoral college votes. When all of that failed, he incited a mob to attack the Capitol and try to stop the certification by force. Trump has been indicted for attempting to overturn election results in Georgia and federally. The indictments detail a conspiracy to submit false electors, pressure state officials, and use violence to remain in power despite losing. He has said he would be dictator only on day one if reelected, a joke that reveals the authoritarian fantasy, which has only become glaring in his second administration. He has threatened to prosecute political opponents, saying he would appoint a special prosecutor to investigate the Bidens. He has said that if reelected, he would purge the federal government of anyone not personally loyal to him. This isn't a politician stretching norms or playing hardball. This is someone who views democratic constraints as illegitimate obstacles to his power. Number 9. Glorification of violence and militarism. Trump has consistently expressed admiration for violence and military displays of power. He wanted a birthday military parade like the ones he saw in Russia and China. He wanted generals who were loyal to him personally the way he thought Hitler had Nazi generals loyal to him. He has praised authoritarian leaders that use violence, including Putin, Xi, and Kim Jong-un. He pardoned war criminals convicted of murdering civilians. He loosened rules of engagement and reduced oversight of military operations. He started an illegal war in Iran without congressional approval. He pardoned all J6 rioters, even those who had waged violence against police officers. He has turned ICE into a paramilitary force at his disposal. His rhetoric glorifies strength and dominance. He describes himself as a tough guy and his opponents as weak. He mocks disabled people, prisoners of war, and anyone he perceives as vulnerable. He admires strength for its own sake, regardless of how it's used.
As somebody who doesn't like Trump, myself, the elites were right about Donald Trump, right? I'm a never Trump guy. I never liked him.
He's the best president of my lifetime, and he revealed the corruption in this country like nobody else.
I can't stomach Trump. I think that he's noxious and is leading the white working class to a very dark place. I think that he was a good president. I think he made a lot of good decisions for people.
I take it you're not a Trump supporter from what I've read. Am I right? Is that a fair assessment?
Yeah, I didn't vote for Trump.
All around, he was a great president. I'm 37 years old. Certainly the best president of my lifetime.
In 2016, you called your running mate Donald Trump unfit for the nation's highest office, and you said he could be America's Hitler.
The golden age of America begins right now. From this day forward, our country will flourish and be respected again all over the world. We will be the envy of every nation, and we will not allow ourselves to be taken advantage of any longer.
Number 10. Nostalgia for a mythical golden age. Make America Great Again is built entirely on this ethos. The slogan itself demands a return to a past that was greater, though Trump has never been too terribly specific about when exactly America was greater, or for whom exactly. The implication is clear. America was greater before civil rights, before women's liberation, before immigration changed the country's demographics, before political correctness supposedly silenced the real Americans. It was greater when hierarchies were clearer and enforced, when white Christian men faced no challenge to their dominance. The same nostalgia Mussolini packaged and weaponized with his appeals to the glory of ancient Rome. A mythical past when the nation was pure, strong, and respected becomes the justification for purging everything that's changed since. The Republican Party has been moving in this direction for years, questioning Obama's legitimacy, obstructing democratic processes, stoking racial resentment, building alternative media ecosystems, and prioritizing power over principles. Trump accelerated and crystallized these tendencies. Elected Republicans who initially criticized him as unfit have almost entirely capitulated. Those who resist, such as Liz Cheney, Adam Kinzinger, and Mitt Romney, are driven from the party. What remains is a movement organized around Trump's personality and willing to embrace authoritarian tactics to maintain power. Republican-controlled states have passed laws restricting voting access, gerrymandering districts to entrench minority rule, and giving legislatures power to override election results. the party has moved from normal conservative politics to something far more insidious.
Boy, look at all the cameras back there. That's amazing. It's the fake news. America needs a superhero. I'm doing my first official Donald J. Trump NFT collection right here and right now. They're called Trump Digital Trading Cards.
Though there are parallels to draw between MAGA and fascist regimes of the 20th century, Trump's brand of fascism is uniquely American and requires an understanding of American history. Trump is not Mussolini or Hitler, nor is he Orban. Two of them were soldiers with credible war records, the third was an activist against a dying communist regime. Trump, conversely, was a draft dodger by choice and a grifter by trade. Unlike others in his orbit, he does not have ideas so much as impulses, whims, and resentments. He is, to be sure, cruel and malicious, but unlike the other dictators, he has no real governing vision. Nor is the United States like other countries in which democracy has perished. America has nearly a quarter millennium of legitimate self-governing under its belt, unlike, say, Weimar Germany, which never had a majority coalition of parties that favored democracy. The US has not experienced in recent years anything like the slaughter of World War I, the murderous chaos of post-World War I Europe, or half a century under the Soviet boot. The US is a continental empire, as the founders called it, and they argued that its physical vastness, the diversity of its population, and the multi-layered nature of its government would form unequaled obstacles to the mob rule or the despotisms experienced by city-states. It is not only much older than the democracies that failed or faltered in Germany, Italy, and Hungary, but nearly an order of magnitude larger in physical extent. MAGA's leader believes in nothing except enriching himself, which makes the movement particularly difficult to define. In fact, it reflects disparate and divergent tendencies, including the divisions between Silicon Valley techno-futurists and old-fashioned nativists, libertarians and pro-lifers, isolationists, and those who look to confront China. Analogies have their place, although they're most useful as a means of sharpening our understanding of what is different about the past rather than purporting to explain the present or predict the future. Trump and Trumpism, the servility of the Republican Party, and the flight from a values-informed foreign policy are all thoroughly American phenomenon and need to be understood through the lens of American history. The despicable parts of the Trump enterprise are best understood in an American context, not through the framework of Mussolini's goons, but rather through the cruelties of Andrew Jackson, America's populist, who presided over the Trail of Tears. Or think of the Palmer raids of 1919 and 1920, or the FBI snooping on Martin Luther King Jr., loyalty oaths, Ku Klux Klan marches, the incarceration of Japanese Americans during World War II. All of these help illuminate how America has gone astray. The personalities that so many find alarming in the Trump administration are best understood not as native variants of Martin Bormann or Nicolas Maduro, but as authentically American demagogues in the mold of Huey Long and Father Coughlin, not to mention businessmen with wild and reprehensible ideas such as Robert McCormick and Henry Ford. Indeed, it's only by seeing Trump's subordinates and henchmen in their American context, in a land that has produced its share of racketeers, bullies, grifters, and thugs, that one can understand these people at all. For critical thinkers, the Trump moment needs to be a reckoning with American history. We must come to accept that we are the country that was born with, and in some cases even embraced, the curse of slavery, but also the country with the principles that ultimately undermined slavery and which inspired the self-sacrifice of heroes who destroyed it. We despoiled much of our fabulous birthright of natural resources and beauty, but also preserved huge swaths of it by creating the greatest national park system in the world. We have supported dictators and we have liberated nations. We have produced Aaron Burr and George Washington, Preston Brooks and Abraham Lincoln, Donald Trump and FDR. Historical analogies, useful as they might be at times, usually cause us to stare out the window, when in reality, we need to be looking in a mirror. Donald Trump did not make American fascism. American fascism made Donald Trump.
Partisan gerrymandering isn't new. The name combines Eldridge Gerry, a founding-era Massachusetts governor, with his salamander-shaped districting map, giving Democratic Republicans more seats. Gerrymanders compress the opposition into few districts and spread closer majorities of those in power across many more. Computer technologies today achieve this with stunning scientific precision. Although estimates vary, in 2024, the Pew Research Center claimed that only 40 out of 435 House districts were competitive. Now, primaries and caucuses are competitive, yet that makes matters worse, turning red states redder and blue states bluer. Texas and Illinois show that both parties play the game, although for particular historical reasons, Republicans tend to play it better. And today's gerrymandering war between Texas and California dominates our headlines. In gerrymandered elections, we don't choose our representatives. They choose us.
The fascist takeover of American politics and society is rooted in the nation's founding, particularly the Electoral College and gerrymandering. With the daily horror of ICE raids, deportations of longtime law-abiding residents, destruction of the rule of law, stripping of personal rights and human decency, it seems strange to bring up what, in large part, threw us all into this calamity. But it's a uniquely American calamity, all our own making, and we shouldn't overlook how a controversial cog in the machinery of our democracy is helping to manufacture its downfall. Thanks to the Electoral College, votes mean more in some states than in other states, instead of every American's vote being equal. Campaigns focus on the states they need to win and leave the others out of the mix. The will of the majority of Americans is threatened in every election and thwarted in some. Donald Trump lost the popular vote in 2016, but he just barely won the Electoral College against Hillary Clinton. If the national vote of the people had decided the 2016 election, Trump would have lost, and it's difficult to imagine that his party would have given him another shot. That means no deadly insurrection, no violent coup would have erupted in an effort to keep a future tyrant in power in 2021. There would have been no power for him to hang on to, and the tyrant would have never had materialized and grown into the horrific monster who stands on the precipice of destroying the world's greatest experiment in democracy. Trump's 2016 election victory marked a fifth time a loser of the people's vote won the election, and in all 5 instances, it was a Republican who was ushered into office contrary to the will of the people. It also marked the second time in 4 elections that the Republican was installed solely by Electoral College votes, the previous being George W. Bush in the year 2000. Those 2 presidents, both initially handed office by the Electoral College, with 5 appointments to the High Court between them, have built the majority of the U.S. Supreme Court that has devastated this nation with its gutting of the rule of law, its empowerment of a tyrant to do whatever he wants with impunity as long as he deems it an official act, its ending of women's rights to make decisions about their own bodies and keep their pregnancies between themselves, their families, and their doctors, and now, perhaps most damaging and horrifying, its sidestepping of birthright citizenship by ending national injunctive relief. If there is a midterm election in November 2026, one that signals a dramatic shift in the party makeup of Congress, there would be a chance of throwing out the Electoral College in favor of direct popular vote to elect the president and vice president. But a Congress so inclined, to the tune of 2/3 of both houses, could only send the proposed constitutional amendment to the states for ratification, requiring 3/4 of state legislatures to approve it. Unless there's a corresponding shift in the makeup of a large number of state legislatures, red states would easily block ratification. Never intended by its creators to help losing candidates win elections, the Electoral College has nonetheless become an enabler of monsters and a destroyer of American democracy. And the damage done may be as insurmountable as it is incalculable. Gerrymandering is as deleterious to American democracy as is the Electoral College. After the Census Bureau released detailed population and demographic data from the 2020 census, states and local governments began the once-in-a-decade process of drawing new voting district boundaries known as redistricting. In gerrymandering, when those boundaries are drawn with the intention of influencing who gets elected, followed. The latest redistricting cycle was the first since the Supreme Court's 2019 ruling that gerrymandering for party advantage cannot be challenged in federal court. Every 10 years, states redraw their state legislative and congressional district lines following the census. Because communities change, redistricting is critical to our democracy. Maps must be redrawn to ensure that districts are equally populated, comply with laws such as the Voting Rights Act, and are otherwise representative of a state's population. But sometimes the process is used to draw maps that put a thumb on the scale to manufacture election outcomes that are detached from the preference of voters. Rather than voters choosing their representatives, gerrymandering empowers politicians to choose their voters. This tends to occur especially when line drawing is left to state legislatures and one political party controls the process, as has become increasingly common. When that happens, partisan concerns almost invariably take precedence over all else. That produces maps where electoral results are virtually guaranteed, even in years where the party drawing maps have a bad year. Gerrymandering has a real impact on the balance of power in Congress and in many state legislatures. And regardless of which party is responsible for gerrymandering in any given state, it's ultimately the American people who lose out. Rigged maps make elections less competitive, in turn making even more Americans feel like their votes just don't matter. There are 7 primary ways in which gerrymandering inflicts damage on American democracy. 1. Districts become safe for the favored party, so those in power tend to stay in power, regardless of their policies or lack thereof. 2. The party in control gets more seats than it earned, undermining the very basis of representative democracy and impeding the alternation of power that is essential for true democracy. 3. Representatives of the party are also protected, so far fewer races are competitive. 4. The primaries become the real race, leading to effective exclusion of many voters and more extreme candidates over time, because primary voters are more ideological. 5. The lack of moderate winners reduces the moderate middle and makes cooperation between parties more difficult, leading to hyper-partisanship. 6. Politicians are not answerable to voters, leading to increased potential for abuse of power by both members and leadership. 7. More voters lose interest in elections since few races are competitive and the same party always wins. Americans must dismantle the Electoral College and gerrymandering if the will of the people is to be anything but a hollow phrase.
Do I have this day an opinion, a personal opinion, on the outcome in Roe versus Wade? And my answer to you is that I do not.
But do you think there is as fundamental a concern as legitimacy of the court would be involved if Roe were to be overturned?
Well, Mr. Chairman, I think that the legitimacy of the court would be undermined in any case if the court made a decision based on its perception of public opinion.
I will decide every case based on the record, according to the rule of law, without fear or favor, to the best of my ability. And I will remember that it's my job to call balls and strikes and not to pitch or bat.
So a good judge will consider it as precedent of the United States Supreme Court, worthy as treatment of precedent like any other.
Senator, I said that it's settled as a precedent of the Supreme Court entitled to respect under principles of stare decisis. And one of the important things to keep in mind about Roe v. Wade is that it has been reaffirmed many times over the past 45 years.
I think it is a very serious threat to the independence and integrity of the courts to politicize them. I think that is not a good development to regard the courts as simply an extension of the political process. That's not what they are.
As Richard Fallon from Harvard said, Roe is not a super precedent because calls for its overruling have never ceased, but that doesn't mean that Roe should be overruled. It just means that it doesn't fall on the small handful of cases like Marbury versus Madison and Brown versus the board that no one questions anymore.
I think the most important thing for the public to understand is that we're not a political branch of government. They don't elect us. If they don't like what we're doing, it's more or less just too bad, other than impeachment, which has never happened, or conviction on impeachment has never happened with the court.
Two dynamics are fundamentally reshaping the structure and functioning of the American government. The first, which is quite well known, is Congress's decline. The second, perhaps somewhat less appreciated but no less significant, is the Supreme Court's ascent, its expansion of its power into areas previously thought to be off limits. These dynamics share a root cause: the partisan polarization that has reshaped American politics over the past 4 decades. But the connection is deeper and more complex than that. Whereas polarization weakened Congress, it emboldened the court to dismantle laws and, in the process, undermine Congress's ability to make laws at all, reinforcing Congress's sclerosis. The citizens and commentators shouting from the sidelines that Congress must act, fix itself, and reclaim its intended role are not wrong, but they miss that the court has made doing so nearly impossible. The practical result is a Congress caught between paralysis and policing, mostly incapable of translating collective judgment into law, and, when it does manage to do so, vulnerable to having its most significant accomplishments, civil rights enforcement, voting protections, campaign finance reform, administrative authority, erased by judicial decree. The judiciary, long conceptualized as a check on legislative excesses, is now defined by its own excess against legislative change. In the name of protecting the balance of powers, the court is radically refashioning that balance, claiming for itself the final and exclusive authority not only which laws stand, but over who gets to say what the Constitution means. The modern court's campaign against Congress began in the late 20th century, amid rising partisanship and institutional upheaval. The Gingrich Revolution, ushered into Washington by the 1994 midterm election, reshaped Congress, accelerating party sorting into distant ideological camps and normalizing scorched earth tactics. The court was not immune to these forces. As inter-branch rivalry morphed into systemic partisan competition, a judiciary dominated by Republican appointees began consolidating its authority at Congress's expense. This turn against Congress reflected a less principled commitment to limited federal legislative power than in opposition to what Congress was doing through the New Deal and Great Society. At risk were congressional assertions of its own interpretation of the 14th Amendment and efforts to enforce that vision in civil rights laws, as well as regulation of interstate commerce. These were domains where conservative activists had long sought to roll policies back, yet lacked the public support to do so. Jurisprudence accomplished what democratic policies could not. In quick succession, the court began circumscribing Congress's ability to define rights and act on its own constitutional imagination. Even acts framed as judicial modesty mask great hubris. Consider the Affordable Care Act, the most important domestic law since Lyndon B. Johnson's Great Society. In 2012, Roberts joined the court's liberal justices to spare the law from wholesale demolition. The remaining conservatives voted to strike it down in full. Yet the Chief Justice's upholding opinion declared that Congress lacked authority under its spending power to enact the insidiously constructed Medicaid expansion. In doing so, the court gutted one of the ACA's most ambitious components, denying millions of poor Americans in red states inexpensive health care coverage. Most dramatically, the court has deconstructed the Voting Rights Act, the crown jewel of the civil rights movement. Meanwhile, a constellation of campaign finance decisions, such as Citizens United in 2010 and McCutcheon in 2014, and others less well known, dismantled Congress's two most significant efforts to regulate private money in public elections, eroding the safeguards that protect elections as conduits of public opinion. Campaign finance laws do more than regulate money in politics. They embody congressional judgments about the conditions necessary for democratic self-government and meaningful political opportunity. The Roberts Court has hollowed out these dynamic sources of congressional constitutionalism. Its voting rights and campaign finance decisions have weakened the electoral systems that make Congress responsive to the public. In dismantling the scaffolding, the court has left Congress more detached from its electorate, diminishing its claim and role as a representative authority.
Artificial person canon. Right. Now, I wrote down beside that, even though you didn't, Citizens United. That's another one that's created a storm.
Well, person isn't used in the First Amendment. I mean, Congress shall make no law abridging the freedom of speech.
But what is your, maybe you don't even want to touch this, but what is your, as a person, do you worry at all? I know you don't, well, as a person, do you worry at all that there's too much money in politics?
No, you know, I really don't. I forget what the figures are, but I think we spend less on our presidential campaigns each year when there's a presidential election than the country spends on cosmetics. I mean,
well, but what about the unusual amount of influence? About, you know, people are worried that the corporations now can buy.
I think this is a real conduit. If you believe that, we ought to go back to monarchy, that the people are such sheep that they just swallow whatever they see on television or read in the newspapers. No, the premise of democracy is that people are intelligent and can discern the true from the false, at least when as the campaign laws require, you know who is speaking. You can't speak anonymously. You have to say, identify the people that are.
But we don't know who's
speaking
in right now.
You mentioned the Supreme Court, and the term started today with the campaign finance case that sort of picks up where Citizens United left off. You've called Citizens United devastating to the public interest. So I wonder if you could weigh in on this latest case.
Well, the latest case would go even further than Citizens United. I mean, essentially, it would say anything goes. There are no rules in terms of how to finance campaigns. There aren't a lot of functioning democracies around the world that work this way, where you can basically have millionaires and billionaires bankrolling whoever they want, however they want, in some cases undisclosed. And what it means is ordinary Americans are shut out of the process. All of us should bind ourselves to some rules that say the people who vote for us should be more important than somebody who's spending $1 million, $10 million, or $100 million to help us get elected. Because we don't know what their agendas are. We don't know what their interests are. And I continue to believe that Citizens United contributed to some of the problems we're having in Washington right now. You have some ideological extremist who has a big bankroll, and they can entirely skew our politics. And there are a whole bunch of members of Congress right now who privately will tell you, I know our positions are unreasonable, but we're scared that if we don't go along with the Tea Party agenda or some particularly extremist agenda, that we'll be challenged from the right. And the threats are very explicit. And so they toe the line. And that's part of why we've seen a breakdown of just normal, routine business done here in Washington on behalf of the American people. A big chunk of the Republican Party right now are in gerrymandered districts where there's no competition, And those folks are much more worried about a Tea Party challenger than they are about a general election where they've got to compete against a Democrat or go after independent votes. And in that environment, it's a lot harder for them to compromise.
The 3 decades that followed the end of World War II constituted the high water mark of the American middle class. During those decades, it was possible to buy a home, raise a family, and put money aside for retirement. Parents sent their kids to schools that not only didn't have active shooter drills, but were open doors for learning. Science was all the rage, and medicine was extending life expectancies. Energy and food were cheap, families saved money and built wealth that they could pass on to their children. The Democratic Party came to be known as the party of the working class. But from the very beginning of the New Deal in the 1930s, wealthy interests began conspiring to dismantle it. They organized, built networks, hired lobbyists, and made campaign contributions designed to elect people who would reverse the so-called excess of American democracy that the New Deal had unleashed. By the 1980s, the effort to reverse American democracy was in full swing. During the following decades, Republicans and Democrats diminished American democracy. Tax rates were lowered, regulations eased or eliminated. It was a Democratic president, Bill Clinton, who eviscerated the Glass-Steagall Act that allowed the worldwide economic meltdown of 2008. It was 2 Republican presidents who sharply reduced the tax rates and eased regulations on the wealthy and corporations. The 1980s and 90s ushered in an age of billionaires. Systemic attacks on unions came in the form of right-to-work laws, and workers rushed to give away their leverage in order to save a few dollars on union dues. The result was 5 decades of stagnant wages and the erosion of the American middle class. Money went to counter the civil rights and voting acts. After all, those acts simply contributed to the excess of democracy and violated the dictum that wealth should count more than mere existence. By the turn of the 21st century, the level of income and wealth inequality began to rival that during the medieval ages. Rising numbers of families were living paycheck to paycheck. As Generation X came of age, the American dream had faded. It took 2 incomes to support a smaller family on meager wages. For the first time in almost a century, parents recognized that their children would not have it better than they did. Millennials faced an even bleaker future as the cost of living increased. Wages stagnated, and more wealth ended up in fewer and fewer hands. So much so that by 2010, 817 billionaires controlled more wealth than the bottom 50% of society. One of the negative implications of excessive wealth is that it allows those who possess it to dominate agencies of society, and the federal and state governments are prime targets. The Citizens United ruling represented a turning point on campaign finance, allowing wealthy interests to accumulate and disperse unlimited campaign contributions. The decision, by a 5-4 vote, reversed century-old campaign finance restrictions and enabled corporations and other outside groups to spend unlimited funds on elections. In a stroke of a pen, the wealthy and corporations became a kind of uber class of citizens, and the dictum of one man, one vote became $1, one vote. Unlike the Connecticut Compromise that gave each slave owner 60 votes for every 100 slaves, Citizens United gave the wealthy 1 billion votes for every $1 billion. It also created the largest group of second-class citizens in history. Individual citizens were no longer owners, but renters in their own country, and the landlords were the uber-wealthy and corporations who set the rents with impunity. The impact of Citizens United was predictable, indeed desired by the wealthy and corporate interests. The floods of money into the political process made campaigning so expensive that candidates were forced to spend most of their time raising money by promising benefits to wealthy and corporate donors. And, once in office, they had to bow to the requests of those donors or lose them to a primary challenger. Money is faithless to any but itself, and it came to dominate and eventually gain control of the entire American political process. Not only did the average citizen become irrelevant, but candidates became servants of the donor class. The decision resulted in a new form of slavery, and the Democratic Party found that it could no longer afford to be the party of the working class. The after effects of Citizens United had minimal effect on the Republican Party. Always seen as the party of the wealthy and corporate interests, the GOP would continue mostly as before. But the impact on the Democratic Party has been much greater. As they lost their hold on the working class, they lost their raison d'etre. As the working class slowly came to realize their relevancy as a political force, they gradually drifted towards the one that seemed the most populist. As long as unlimited money is the driving political force in American society, the working class will find no serious advocates for their interests, only feigned concern for their welfare. It seems naive to expect that should they get back in control of the White House and Congress, the Democrats will overturn the Citizens United decision. They are, after all, as addicted to money as the Republicans are. But if the Democrats do not abandon culture war identity politics in exchange for class-conscious politics, American democracy has no chance of revival.
They're destroying the blood of our country. That's what they're doing. They're destroying our country. They don't like it when I said that. And I never read Mein Kampf. They said, oh, Hitler said that.
Project 2025. It's a blueprint for a radical far-right takeover of everything in the U.S. government.
And everyone's talking about it. It's really having a brat summer.
Project 2025, a 922-page blueprint to make Donald Trump the most powerful president ever.
One that would turn the Justice Department against critics, deport millions of people in the U.S. illegally, slap 10% tariffs on thousands of products, fire perhaps tens of thousands of government staff deemed insufficiently loyal.
I have nothing to do with Project 2025. I haven't read it. I don't want to read it purposely. I'm not going to read it. I don't know anything about it. I don't want to know anything about it. We pledge to you that we will root out the communists, Marxists, fascists, and the radical left thugs that live like vermin within the confines of our country, that lie and steal and cheat on elections and will do anything possible. They'll do anything, whether legally or illegally, to destroy America and to destroy the American dream. The threat from outside forces is far less sinister, dangerous, and grave than the threat from within.
Well, the problem is on the left. If you look at the problem is on the left. It's not on the right, like some people like to say on the right. The problem we have is on the left. And when you look at the agitators, you look at the scum.
That we are in the process of the Second American Revolution, which will remain bloodless if the left allows it to be.
They're not humans. They're not humans. They're animals. Now, if I don't get elected, it's going to be a bloodbath for the whole... That's going to be the least of it. It's going to be a bloodbath for the country. That'll be the least of it. And the election was rigged. They're bringing drugs. They're bringing crime. They're rapists. I don't think you're going to have another election in this country if we don't win this election. We got a lot of work to do. They're poisoning the blood of our country. That's what they've done. They poison mental institutions and prisons all over the world, not just in South America, not just the 3 or 4 countries that we think about, but all over the world. They're coming into our country from Africa, from Asia, all over the world. They're pouring into our country. Nobody's even looking at them. They just come in. My administration will take all lawful steps to shut down the department. We're going to shut it down and shut it down as quickly as possible. It's doing us no good. We return our students to the states.
Today we purchased over 500 Bibles that will be in the AP government classrooms across the state. Bible just like this.
The same Bible endorsed by Donald Trump and selling for $60 per copy.
We must make America pray again. We have removed the poison of critical race theory from our public schools.
Believe it or not, the American conservative movement has been studying the work of Antonio Gramsci for years, and his ideas on the importance of culture and ideology have had a big impact on them. The American right has concluded that the American left has been following Gramsci's lead ever since the cultural revolutions of the 1960s, and captured the press, the universities, civil society, and most government institutions. To counter that, conservatives have built their own media and think tanks, cultivated an institutional base in Christian churches, and developed a narrative focused on attacking abortion rights, immigrants, and the civil rights advances of the 1960s. This so-called War for the Soul of America is central to Project 2025's Mandate for Leadership report, which presents a blueprint for MAGA and a strategic plan for the use of power. According to its logic, left-leaning elites who promote human rights, racial justice, gender equality, and environmental protection are enemies of the people. The people, of course, is shorthand for property and business owners, just as it was by the nation's founders 250 years before. A half-century before the rise of the Heritage Foundation, Gramsci wrote about how leading elements of the capitalist class build hegemonic blocks to create a ruling consensus. The block establishes commonly accepted forms of accumulation and political rule, as well as cultural and ideological domination, or ideas that become accepted as common sense. Adherents of Project 2025 are best thought of in American politics as the neo-fascist bloc. They seek stability through repression and creating a mass base through religious fundamentalism, patriarchy, and white supremacy. The project was initiated and published by the Heritage Foundation, the most influential right-wing think tank and the closest to the power centers of the right and Republican Party. It has united much of the conservative movement, their think tanks, activists, and lobbying groups with the goal of installing a much more effective, more ruthless right wing. It comes with tremendous funding and the backing of much of the political right and believes there is a socialist plot in the highest echelons of American power. It sees a vast conspiracy with enemies everywhere and that un-American forces have overtaken every institution. Project 2025 is a major policy and ideological projection. It is a fascist document and puts forward a strategic path to create an authoritarian Christian-dominated society through control of the state. Project 2025 is the most developed plan there is amongst the fascist bloc and has been signed by over 100 groups and think tanks. They are Trump's ideological and political brain. Trump's nihilism and feral instincts make him just the useful idiot to lead this kind of fascist project. China, globalists, political and academic elites, the left, socialists, communists. For Project 2025, it's all just one enemy. And Trump has promised the group that he plans to rid the country of what he called left vermin. Here are the 5 primary ways Project 2025 aims to turn America into a fascist state. Number 1. Purge left elites in major departments. According to the project, large sections of the State Department's workforce are left-wing and thus predisposed to disagree with the conservative president's agenda and vision. Number 2. Reverse gains in gender justice. Women's and gender rights are targets that generate a particular degree of fear and hatred in Project 2025. The group advocates the abolition of the Gender Policy Council, and it wants to delete a host of terms such as sexual orientation, gender identity, gender equality, gender equity, abortion, and dozens of others. The group also wants every U.S. state to be required to report exactly how many abortions take place, the gestational age of each child, and why the abortion took place, as well as the mother's home residency. 3. End environmental justice and protection projects. When it comes to environmental science and regulations, Project 2025 takes the same extreme approach. It wants to abolish the Office of Domestic Climate Policy, the Office of Environmental Justice and Civil Rights, and the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration because it, quote, constitutes one of the main drivers of climate change alarm industry. It goes on to state that environmental extremism serves to undermine the strength of the United States. Number 4. Dismantle diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives. As for confronting racial inequality and discrimination, Project 2025 wants every department, from the Department of Labor to the U.S. Agency for International Development, to be scrubbed clean of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and treat the participation in any critical race theory or diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives as grounds for termination of employment. Furthermore, Project 2025 warns bureaucrats at the Department of Education, quote, inject racist, anti-American, ahistorical propaganda into classrooms, and critical race theory and gender ideology should be excluded from curriculum in every public school in the country because they poison our children. This coincides with Trump calling immigrants animals that poison the blood of the country. Number 5. Restore traditional values through state action. Project 2025 states that all policy should be guided by traditional values. According to Project 2025, the pursuit of the good life is found primarily in family, in marriage, children, and, above all, in religious devotion and spirituality. Project 2025 is a well-organized, very well-financed, highly motivated, and ideological rigorous fascist enterprise.
Americans born in the decades after World War II were handed the world on a silver platter.
Cheap college, cheap housing,
abundant opportunity. The vast majority of you ended up wealthier than your parents.
And Lord knows it wasn't because you were smarter or worked harder.
It was because America was an escalator.
You just had to stand on it. You've been an electoral powerhouse since the 80s.
When presented with a choice between protecting your interests
or investing in a better future for your children,
you usually chose yourselves.
Can you believe it?
More benefits for boomers.
More tax cuts for boomers.
And borrowed money to make up the difference. Over the past quarter century, you've put almost $30 trillion on the national credit card. On behalf of future generations stuck with the bill, what is your problem?
What's your problem?
A year at a public university
costs almost 4 times as much as it did in 1970 after adjusting for inflation.
The average house costs more than 2 times as much.
And you made it difficult for younger Americans to live in the cities with the best jobs.
You regularly use your electoral might to squash plans for new construction and protect your property values.
It's like you think democracy only exists so that you can band together en masse to freeze your communities in time.
You're the reason so many Americans sleep in their cars.
You're the reason that public schools today are more segregated than they were in 1968.
It's easy to blame the nation's political leaders.
But let's be clear, for the last few decades, they've mostly been members of your generation.
Elected with your support.
To protect your interests.
From the first boomer president, Bill Clinton,
to the current boomer president, who is hopefully the last one. The Bush years were peak boomer. In 2001, when the government's coffers were overflowing,
you did what you always did.
You passed a giant tax cut, dividing the money amongst yourselves.
In 2003, you did it again. And in 2006, you were all in for a big increase in government spending
on Medicare, just in time for the first boomer retirees.
You decided you'd rather have Walmarts than factory jobs. And you didn't ask too many questions about the low price of your supersized flat screen TV.
You enjoyed the short-term benefits of deregulating the banking industry,
telecommunications, and a host of other industries,
leaving future generations to clean up the mess of corporate consolidation and junk fees.
But hey, making things cheaper for yourself at everyone else's expense is kind of your MO.
You tree-hugging hippies championed environmentalism. But what is your legacy? A world that keeps burning more carbon and a planet that keeps getting hotter.
Instead of actually confronting the problem, you embrace recycling, a con game that allows people to pretend they care about the planet without doing anything, even a little difficult.
Like using fewer plastic bottles. You exported your waste to less wealthy nations, or you just dumped it in the ocean. Thanks to you, there's an island of trash 3 times the size of France, swirling off the coast of California.
But don't think we're entirely ungrateful.
We appreciate the progress that you made on civil rights and gender equality.
Although you don't always seem to understand that there's still a lot of work to do. Thanks for the avocados, some good music, and the World Wide Web. But maybe, instead of writing poster puns, it's time to write some apology notes.
It's a special interest. It's the utility companies and the petroleum companies and the other special interests. They're the ones that have blocked progress in the Congress of the United States and in the administration. That's a little straight talk.
We don't always see eye to eye, do we, Newt?
No, but we do agree our country must take action to address climate change.
We need to ultimately make clean, renewable energy the profitable kind of energy. So I ask this Congress to send me legislation that places a market-based cap on carbon pollution and drives the production of more renewable energy in America.
You do not think that human activity, the production of CO2, has caused warming to our planet?
I do not believe that human activity is causing these dramatic changes to our climate the way these scientists are portraying it.
The world's top climate panel has issued its direst appeal to date on the need to stop global warming. In a new report, the United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change says continued emissions of greenhouse gases will cause further warming and long-lasting changes in all components of the climate system, increasing the likelihood of severe, pervasive, and irreversible impacts.
Satellite data demonstrate for the last 17 years, there's been zero warming, none whatsoever.
I think that there'll be little change here. It'll go up, it'll get a little cooler, it'll get a little warmer like it always has for millions of years. It'll get cooler, it'll get warmer. It's called weather. I think it's a big scam for a lot of people to make a lot of money.
Feeling the heat? So is planet Earth. Federal scientists announced today that 2015 was the warmest year on record, with land and ocean temperatures nearly 2 degrees above average.
A major setback tonight for President Obama's climate change initiative.
The U.S. Supreme Court stepped in to put the centerpiece of President Obama's climate change agenda on hold, pending the outcome of judicial appeals in the lower courts.
Trump's statement comes just a couple days after he released his first energy plan. He says he would, quote, cancel the Paris climate deal and promote more fossil fuels in the United States.
The United States will withdraw from the Paris Climate Accord. Thank you.
It's been said that populism and Donald Trump were pushed to the center of American politics by the 2008 economic collapse and carnage. But 2008 was manufactured by bad policies that benefited no one but baby boomers. The baby boomer generation's impact on the US economy has been profound, with data showing that between 1980 and 2024, they accumulated $35 trillion in national debt, while inflating housing prices by 400% and quadrupling college costs. Today, boomers control 53% of US wealth, despite representing only 21% of the population. This economic imbalance has led to stagnant wages, crushing debt, and vanishing economic opportunity for millennials and Gen Z. Understanding the effects of boomer policies requires examining housing, education, wages, debt, and climate policy. Baby boomers didn't just buy homes, they weaponized them. In the 1970s and 80s, boomers purchased affordable starter homes with median prices around $47,000. Adjusted for inflation today, that's about $170,000. They then pulled up the ladder behind them. Once they owned property, boomers voted overwhelmingly for restrictive zoning laws that blocked new housing construction. Cities like San Francisco, Seattle, and Boston became boomer fortresses where single-family zoning prevented the density needed to accommodate growing populations. The result? Artificial scarcity that sent home prices skyrocketing. This is precisely how baby boomers ruined the economy for generations trying to build wealth through home ownership. Boomers turned housing from a basic need into a speculative asset class. They refinanced repeatedly to extract equity, treating homes like ATMs while younger generations couldn't even get their foot in the door. According to the Federal Reserve, home ownership rates for Americans under 35 have plummeted from 43% in 2005 to 35% by 2026. Boomers attended college when tuition was cheap, often just a few $100s per semester at public universities. Many worked part-time summer jobs and graduated debt-free. Then they systemically defunded higher education, concomitant to telling their children that they had to go to be successful. In 1980, the average cost for public university tuition was $1,800. Adjusted for inflation, that's around $6,500 per year. Now, the cost for public education is $29,000 per year. That's an increase of 442% since 1980. State legislatures, dominated by boomer politicians, slashed education funding by over 30% between 1990 and 2020. Universities compensated by jacking up tuition and relying on student loans. The result? $1.7 trillion in student debt, crushing an entire generation. When examining how baby boomers ruin the economy, the student debt crisis stands as one of the most damning pieces of evidence. But boomers didn't stop at making college unaffordable. They also devalued the degrees themselves by flooding the market with credential requirements for entry-level jobs. Now one needs a bachelor's degree just to answer phones, a job boomers did with a high school diploma. Boomers are the first and likely last generation to enjoy guaranteed pensions and Social Security. They lived through the golden generation of defined benefit retirement plans, then voted to eliminate them for future generations. In the 1980s and 90s, boomer-led corporations also systemically replaced pensions with 401k plans, shifting all investment risk onto workers. Meanwhile, boomers who had already locked in their pensions kept them. Corporate executives, mostly boomers, pocketed the savings. This pension bait and switch perfectly illustrates how baby boomers ruin the economy for future generations. Social Security was designed as a generational compact. Workers pay in, retirees draw out, but boomers are draining that system at an unprecedented rate. There's 10,000 boomers retiring per day. The projected insolvency for Social Security is thus 2034. Boomers have taken out far more than they pay into the system as well. The average boomer couple will receive $1 million in Social Security and Medicare benefits while contributing just $600,000 in taxes. Who's going to pay for that $400,000? Future generations. Boomers voted for massive government spending increases, especially on defense and Medicare, while simultaneously demanding tax cuts for themselves. The result is a $35 trillion national debt that millennials and Gen Z will spend their entire lives servicing. Let's look at the timeline of theft. In 1981, Reagan's tax cuts on the top 1%, which were boomer approved, slashed them from 70 to 28%. From 2001 to 2003, Bush's tax cuts further reduced revenue. In 2017 and 2025, Trump's tax cuts added respectively $1.9 trillion to the national debt and another $1.8 trillion to the national debt. Every single one of these cuts disproportionately benefited boomers at the peak of their earning years. Meanwhile, federal spending on education, infrastructure, and social programs for younger Americans was gutted. Understanding how baby boomers ruin the economy requires examining this deliberate debt and tax-cutting strategy that enriched one generation at the expense of all to follow. Boomers borrowed against the future and left younger generations holding the bill. They enjoyed the benefits of government spending without paying for it. The boomers' hoarding of wealth isn't an accident, it's the deliberate policy choices made by boomer politicians and voters over 4 decades. Every statistic, every chart, every data point confirms the same reality: how baby boomers ruin the economy through systemic wealth extraction disguised as economic growth. They didn't just benefit from prosperity, they actively rigged the system to transfer wealth upward while pulling the ladder up behind them. While boomers enjoyed union protections and strong labor laws earlier in their careers, they spent the next 40 years dismantling those same protections for younger workers. In 1983, union membership nationally was 20%. By 2024, that had dropped to 10%. This was driven by corporate-era right-to-work laws and corporate lobbying. Boomers voted overwhelmingly for politicians who gutted labor rights, outsourced manufacturing, and enabled the so-called gig economy that treats workers as disposable contractors. They extracted maximum value from corporate profits while ensuring younger workers had zero leverage. The wealth didn't trickle down, it flooded up, because boomers rigged the game, and then lectured younger generations about working harder. This isn't a partisan issue, it's a generational one. Both Democrats and Republicans are boomer-dominated establishments that prioritize their generation's interests over everyone else's. Democrats talk about student relief, then mean-test it into oblivion. Republicans cut taxes for the wealthy, then they bemoan deficits. Both parties protect Medicare and Social Security for boomers while slashing programs for everyone else. The uniparty establishment, boomer politicians on both sides, has one goal: preserve their wealth and their power. Neither party represents younger Americans. When you look at how the baby boomers ruined the economy, you see bipartisan cooperation. Both parties work together to transfer wealth upward and burden future generations with debt. Boomers also knew about climate change since the 70s. Scientists had warned them repeatedly. Instead of acting, they doubled down on fossil fuels, blocked renewable energy development, and left future generations with an unlivable planet and massive economic cleanup. The cost of climate inaction will fall entirely on millennials and Gen Z. Extreme weather, mass migration, and ecosystem collapse, all preventable if boomers had acted. But they chose short-term profits over long-term survival. Climate economists now calculate how baby boomers ruin the economy includes trillions in deferred environmental costs that younger generations must pay. The damage is done, but the future doesn't have to be boomer-controlled. Here's what needs to happen. 1. End housing as an investment. Implement vacancy taxes, ban corporate homeownership, and bulldoze restrictive zoning. 2. Cancel student debt. Full forgiveness, no means testing. Boomers got free college, we get debt relief. 3. Fix Social Security. Raise the cap on taxable income and means test benefits for wealthy boomers. 4. Tax wealth, not work. Capital gains should be taxed higher than wages. Make boomers pay their fair share. 5. Climate reparations. Carbon tax on corporations, with revenue funding green infrastructure jobs for young workers. Boomers won't fix this. Millennials and Gen Z have to. Every election, every protest, every policy fight is a chance to reclaim what the boomers stole from future generations. Baby boomers didn't just live through economic prosperity, they hoarded it, weaponized it, and left future generations to pick up the pieces. From housing to education to climate change, every major crisis facing millennials and Gen Z can be traced back to boomer policies and boomer greed. The economy didn't just happen to be unaffordable. Boomers made it that way. And until the generations that follow the boomers acknowledge how they ruined the economy through deliberate policy choices over 4 decades, the economy will never be fixed. It's not uncommon to hear that boomers built their wealth through hard work and smart decisions. However, this narrative overlooks the systemic advantages and policy changes that facilitated their economic success. For instance, boomers benefited from post-World War II economic booms, expansive homeownership subsidies, and tax policies that favored the wealthy. These factors, combined with their voting power, allowed them to create a wealth-concentrating system that younger generations could not replicate. Moreover, data shows that wealth inequality has skyrocketed since the 1980s, of the top 1% now holding more wealth than the bottom 90%. This isn't just about individual hard work, it's about how policy and economic structures have disproportionately benefited one generation over others. Baby boomers accumulated wealth through a combination of expansive homeownership, increased access to higher education, and policy decisions like tax cuts that disproportionately benefited them. They also held on to jobs longer, limiting opportunities for younger workers, and voted for policies that protected their financial interests. Addressing the economic imbalance requires policy reforms such as increasing taxes on wealth, implementing student loan forgiveness, and fixing Social Security to ensure it remains solvent. Additionally, affordable housing initiatives and climate policies that create green jobs can help redistribute wealth more equitably. While the issue here is framed generationally, It's fundamentally about economic fairness and policy accountability. The decisions made by boomers have long-term consequences for the entire economy, affecting not just millennials and Gen Z, but future generations as well. It's about ensuring that economic opportunities are available to all, regardless of age.
Here we go again.
I could say, no, don't give us, I want to pay you $1 billion or 400 million or whatever it is. Or I could say, thank you very much.
I'm not just MAGA, I'm dark, gothic MAGA. Well, the energy in this room is incredible. All government spending is taxation. So whether it's direct taxation or all government spending, it either becomes inflation or it's direct taxation. Your money is being wasted, and the Department of Government Efficiency is going to fix that. America's just not just going to be great. America is going to reach heights that it has never seen before. The future is going to be amazing! You guys are awesome. Honestly, this is like...
But I've been told by a lot of support. He had a lot of support. And they said that what he did is not even a crime.
And we're going to take Doge to Mars. I mean, can you imagine how awesome it will be to have American astronauts plant the flag on another planet for the first time? Bam! Bam! Yeah! Yes! This is what victory feels like.
Tonight, we are getting our first look at what the Donald J. Trump Presidential Library will look like. President Trump's son, Eric, releasing this video showing a tower with a design similar to the One World Trade Center in New York. The library would be built on a lot next to Miami's Freedom Tower after a judge cleared the way for the prime piece of land downtown to be used for the site.
Yeah! And this was no ordinary victory. This was a fork in the road of human civilization.
One of the things all fascist regimes have in common is that they're full of grifters who cloak their social Darwinistic worldview of might makes right in sanctified language. In truth, it's all just a means of turning the government into a machine to maximize their own wealth and power. Donald Trump's second administration is rife with an astonishing amount of corruption. Since his return to the White House in January 2025, Trump has continued the same transactional approach to governing that characterized his first term, albeit now with an even greater, unprecedented level of unabashed political corruption. Trump has made clear that favorable treatment from his administration is available for a price, and wealthy individuals, companies, and special interest groups have lined up to pay. A defining feature of the Trump administration is that those who pay get to play. Multi-million-dollar political donors have been rewarded with prominent government positions and the power to financially benefit their own bottom lines. Seven-figure corporate donations have translated to executive branch support for legislative and policy positions. Major media companies seeking to stay in the administration's good graces have paid Trump millions of dollars to settle meritless lawsuits. Federal investigations and enforcement actions have dissolved for the right price. This is not just abnormal, it defies any semblance of integrity or ethics in government. While presidents of both major parties have offered plum ambassadorships and other key government jobs to their biggest fundraisers and allies, no other president appears to have filled their cabinet and executive branch with this many wealthy donors, or established what is effectively an explicit nexus between major donations and favorable official actions, including pardons and commutations, dropped investigations and enforcement actions, and policy decisions sought by special interests. Trump's corrupt transactions raise major questions not only about the abuse and exploitation of elected office for personal and political gain, but also about the unprecedented power of wealthy special interests to steer the federal government in ways that serve their goals, their best interests, at the expense of everyday Americans' interests and, more fundamentally, Americans' trust in their democracy. The current unprecedented level of blatant corruption in the American government highlights the need for change, both specifically to address particular flaws in the systems designed to prevent corruption, and, more fundamentally, to address the underlying problems of a political system that bestows such enormous, outsized power on a tiny, unrepresentative group of the ultra-wealthy. Federal campaign finance and ethics laws are designed to prevent candidates and office holders from becoming beholden to big donors or using their positions for personal or political gain. This is precisely what Trump is doing in his second administration, which makes it abundantly clear that these anti-corruption systems urgently need to be fixed. Trump has rewarded major political donors with plum government appointments to cabinet and other executive branch positions, including positions that allow such appointees to protect and promote their own financial interests. Elon Musk spent almost $300 million to support Trump's candidacy during the 2024 election. Musk was able to use his position as a special government employee and the head of DOGE, which stands for the Department of Government Efficiency, to benefit his own personal financial interests. Musk corrupted decision-making at the Federal Aviation Administration regarding the use of Starlink, Musk's satellite internet telecommunications company. President Trump and his Secretary of Commerce, Howard Lutnick, encouraged the public to buy stock in Tesla, Musk's electric vehicle company. Secretary Lutnick may have violated federal rules prohibiting executive branch officials from using their public office to promote any product, service, or enterprise. The U.S. government encouraged foreign nations to make deals with Starlink in the midst of tariff extension negotiations. White House staff directed federal officials at the General Services Administration to contract with xAI, Musk's official intelligence AI startup company, to incorporate xAI's Grok chatbot into contracting services. Lyndon McMahon donated $20 million to Trump in his re-election campaign in 2024. He then made her Secretary of Education, though she has no background in education. Scott Bessent gave Trump $1 million during his re-election campaign in 2024. Trump then made him Secretary of the Treasury. Kelly Loeffler donated $6 million. Trump then made her the head of the Small Business Administration. Howard Lutnick gave Trump more than $10 million. Trump made him Secretary of Commerce. Charles Kushner, in 2004, pleaded guilty to 16 counts of federal tax evasion, retaliating against a witness, and making false statements to the FEC, and was subsequently sentenced to 24 months imprisonment. Trump, whose daughter Ivanka later married Kushner's son Jared, pardoned Kushner at the end of his first term in December 2020. During the 2024 election cycle, Kushner gave $2 million to Trump, along with a host of other donations to Republican Party's federal and state committees. Trump then appointed Kushner as his ambassador to France and Monaco. Under the Trump administration, individuals convicted of crimes or subject to civil enforcement suits have received preferential treatment when they contribute financially to Trump's interests. The founder and former CEO of crypto exchange Binance was sentenced to 4 months in prison after pleading guilty to charges over his willful failure to maintain an anti-money laundering program, which allowed the exchange to be used by terrorists, drug traffickers, child abusers, and other criminals. Zhao, who reportedly owns 90% of Binance, also paid a $50 million fine and relinquished his position as Binance's CEO. Binance itself agreed to pay a $4.3 billion fine, submit to stringent oversight, and fully exit from the US market. As Trump and his family began organizing the cryptocurrency venture World Liberty Financial in 2024, Binance officials deployed a team of more than a dozen engineers to build the underlying technologies behind the company's signature cryptocurrency. In March 2025, Binance channeled $2 billion to WLF through a deal with an Emirati state-owned investment firm, ultimately making billions of dollars for the Trump family, which owns a sizable stake in WLF. Within months of Binance's effort to bolster WLF's position in the crypto industry, which greatly enriched the Trump family, President Trump pardoned Zhao in October 2025. The Trump administration has dropped federal cases and investigations against businesses that were potentially harming consumers, giving his benefactors a payout at the cost of protecting the American people. This has been particularly notable in the cryptocurrency industry, with one crypto executive telling the Wall Street Journal, quote, "The new badge of honor in Silicon Valley is if the SEC has dropped your case." In 2023, the Securities and Exchange Commission charged cryptocurrency entrepreneur and investor Justin Sun and 3 of his companies with illegally offering and selling unregistered crypto securities. After Trump took office in January 2025, the SEC paused its enforcement action against Sun and his companies. Sun purchased nearly $19 million worth of Trump's meme coin. And as the leading holder of Trump coin, Sun was invited to the Trump's private crypto dinner at the White House in May 2025, at which most attendees were invited based on being one of the top purchasers of the Trump meme coin. As the leading holder of the Trump meme coin, Sun was invited to Trump's private crypto dinner at the White House in May 2025. Sun has also previously invested $75 million into crypto tokens issued by World Liberty Financial, the Trump family crypto venture managed by his sons, Don and Eric. Mark Andreessen and Ben Horowitz, who founded and run the Silicon Valley venture capital firm Andreessen Horowitz, which is a major Coinbase investor, gave a combined $6 million to MAGA Inc. in early 2025. Coinbase also gave $1 million to the Trump inaugural fund. In February 2025, the SEC dropped a civil enforcement action it had filed against Coinbase. Coinbase then donated to Trump's $300 million ballroom project. Robinhood, which operates a cryptocurrency exchange, gave $2 million to Trump's inaugural fund. Robinhood had previously been under investigation by the SEC for offering unregistered securities, but the SEC dropped the investigation with no action in February 2025. Cameron and Tyler Winklevoss, the founders of the cryptocurrency exchange Gemini, contributed more than $2.5 million in total support to Trump's 2024 presidential campaign. In 2023, Gemini had been accused by the SEC of offering and selling unregistered securities, but shortly after Trump took office, in February 2025, the SEC dropped their investigation. Tyler and Cameron were subsequently invited to the White House's crypto summit, and the twins donated to Trump's ballroom project. The SEC formally dismissed its lawsuit against Gemini in January 2026. In October 2025, Trump hosted dozens of corporate executives and other wealthy donors who had given or pledged at least $2.5 million to the ballroom project. While the White House has publicly released the names of some ballroom donors, the administration has allowed others to be shielded from public disclosure. In December 2025, Trump announced Freedom 250, an initiative created to solicit donations from events purportedly related to the 250th anniversary of the United States. Donors who give $1 million or more to Freedom 250 will reportedly receive an invitation to a reception hosted by Trump. The solicitation materials describe several levels of sponsorship, the highest level requiring a donation in excess of $10 million with corresponding benefits packages. As with the Ballroom Project, some donations to Freedom 250 may not be disclosed, raising serious concerns about additional transactions occurring outside of the public eye. The television station ABC agreed to pay $15 million to Trump's Presidential Library Fund, as well as $1 million in legal fees to settle a frivolous defamation lawsuit Trump filed. Because presidential library funds are not subject to rigorous oversight, it's unclear how this money will ultimately be spent. This settlement was reportedly an attempt to gain Trump's favor and forestall any adverse official action, as well as blowback against ABC's brands, including Disney. Paramount agreed to pay $16 million, with most of that money going towards Trump's presidential library fund, to settle a frivolous lawsuit seeking $20 billion, in which Trump alleged that 60 Minutes had deceptively edited an interview with Kamala Harris, the 2024 Democratic presidential candidate and Trump's general election opponent. Days after the settlement payment was transferred, the FCC approved a proposed merger between Paramount and another media company, Skydance Media, which required the FCC's approval. Reports indicate that Skydance's CEO, David Ellison, the son of Trump's friend and Oracle co-founder Larry Ellison, also made a side deal to run between $15 and $20 million worth of ads supporting Trump causes. Meta, formerly known as Facebook, agreed to pay $25 million, $22 million directed to Trump's presidential library fund, and $3 million in legal fees to settle a frivolous lawsuit Trump filed in 2021. Trump's suit alleged that Meta, a private corporation, violated the First Amendment, which protects against government restrictions on the freedom of speech, when Meta suspended Trump's accounts on its Facebook and Instagram social media platforms after the January 6, 2021 insurrection attempt on the Capitol. Meta also gave $1 million to Trump's inaugural fund in December 2024. After Trump won re-election in November 2024, Meta's CEO Mark Zuckerberg sought to reset his once strained relationship with Trump, including by reportedly making several trips to visit Trump at his Mar-a-Lago resort in Florida, attending private dinners with Trump at the White House, and terminating Meta's DEI programs and fact-checking policies, both of which Trump has vocally opposed. Following Amazon founder Jeff Bezos' December 2024 Mar-a-Lago dinner with then-President-elect Donald Trump, Amazon agreed to pay $40 million, reportedly the most Amazon had ever spent on a documentary and nearly 3 times the next closest offer to acquire it, to license a documentary and limited series about First Lady Melania Trump, which she would executive produce. Ms. Trump is set to personally earn more than $28 million from the deal. Amazon has additionally spent $35 million to market the film, reportedly 10 times what some other high-profile documentaries have received for marketing, bringing total spending on the documentary to $75 million. Amazon also gave $1 million to Trump's inaugural fund. The company also donated to Trump's $300 million ballroom project. The company's cloud computing arm, Amazon Web Services, earned more than $500 million from federal contracts over the previous 3 years. 4 days before President Trump's second inauguration, a firm backed by a UAE senior government official who controls $1.5 trillion of the country's sovereign wealth fund signed a $500 million deal with World Liberty Financial, the cryptocurrency startup company founded by Zach and Alex Witkoff, sons of Trump's Middle East special envoy Steve Witkoff, and Trump's sons, Donald Trump Jr. and Eric Trump. The agreement included $187 million in upfront payments to Trump family entities and gave Sheikh Tahnoun's company a 49% stake in World Liberty Financial. In March 2025, Sheikh Tahnoun met with Trump and several high-ranking U.S. officials at the White House to discuss ways for the United States and UAE to increase their partnership for the advancing of their economic and technological futures. On May 1, 2025, it was announced that an investment firm run by Sheikh Tahnoun would deposit $2 billion worth of funds into World Liberty Financial, which gave the fledgling company enough money to invest that it reportedly could generate tens of millions of dollars a year in revenue for the Trump family and its partners. 2 weeks later, the U.S. signed an agreement with the UAE allowing access to American-made AI computing chips. Access to these advanced and scarce chips, which are made by American companies and are highly coveted by other countries, requires U.S. government permission. The UAE was reportedly the first foreign country to finalize an agreement to buy the chips. The involvement of senior U.S. government officials raised major ethical conflicts. David Sachs, who has continued working in venture capital while advising on tech policy as Trump's AI and crypto czar, helped negotiate the UAE chips deal, and Witkoff reportedly advocated for the chips deal at around the same time as negotiations were ongoing over the UAE investment in World Liberty Financial, a deal that financially benefited both Witkoff's and Trump's families. The Qatari government gifted a Boeing 747 jet valued at roughly $400 million to the U.S. Air Force to be used as Air Force One for the remainder of Trump's second term as president. Ownership of the plane will be transferred to the Trump Presidential Library Foundation by January 2029. The estimated cost of refurbishing the plane is $400 million, with some critics arguing it could be as much as $1 billion. In exchange, Trump's business struck a deal to develop a golf course and luxury villas on Qatar's eastern coastline. The White House announced an agreement with Qatar to generate an economic exchange worth at least $1.2 trillion, which includes a number of deals between Doha and U.S. defense companies. This isn't just brazen corruption. The second Trump administration is selling out Americans to enrich the Trump family. Trump corruption exceeds anything akin to Watergate, and yet Trump avoids accountability because this kind of corruption is simply the way business in America is done after the Supreme Court's decision that anything Trump does as official business while in office is legal, no matter how profoundly corrupt it is. This all comes at the expense of the vast majority of the citizenry who feel powerless to staunch the systemic erosion of the American political system. Perhaps most astonishing of all is that the corruption chronicled in this film is just the tip of the iceberg in Trump's administration. This rampant corruption is the result of a far deeper rot in the polity, with all roads leading back to a politicized and corrupted Supreme Court. President Trump's brazen moves to exploit the power of the presidency to extract financial benefits for himself, his family, and his political allies presents an unprecedented challenge to the long-standing framework of laws and ethical norms that are vital to preserving the public's trust in American democracy. America's democracy is under attack, but all hope is not lost. There are ways to confront this fascism. While many of Trump's actions, however corrupt, fall within his powers and discretion as the duly elected president, there are specific actions that Congress can and should take to limit such exploitation, as well as broader policy solutions that would reduce the impact of big money on the political process. The problems we're seeing are generally the outgrowth of the 2010 Supreme Court decision Citizens United versus FEC, which was based on the thoroughly flawed belief that money that is not a direct campaign contribution, i.e. outside spending, can't corrupt candidates and elected officials, and therefore unlimited spending on elections is fine as long as it's independent and openly disclosed. This spending, however, has never been truly independent or openly disclosed. Outside spending groups like super PACs routinely coordinate their activities with candidates' campaigns, and the very existence of dark money groups undermines the principle of transparency and democracy. Under America's current system, candidates and elected officials can be bought with contributions from outside groups like super PACs, as well as through post-election donations to inaugural funds and presidential libraries.
All of us here today do not want to see our election victory stolen by emboldened radical left Democrats, which is what they're doing, and stolen by the fake news media. That's what they've done and what they're doing. We will never give up. We will never concede. It doesn't happen. You don't concede when there's theft involved. Our country has had enough. We will not take it anymore, and that's what this is all about. And to use a favorite term that all of you people really came up with, we will stop the steal.
The insurrection attempt at the Capitol building in Washington, D.C. on January 6, 2021, was a prominent salvo in the fascist systemic takeover of all three branches of America's constitutional government, as well as the nation's so-called fourth estate, the corporate-owned media. But the anti-democratic and fascist impulse in American society is not new. It's woven into the country's DNA. So much so that voters for authoritarians often perceive themselves to be upholding democratic values as their rights are being denied by those they voted for. From the outside looking into the United States of America in the late 2020s, it might seem that Donald Trump's presidency is a cancer on the American system and polity. That's somewhat of a deception. Donald Trump did not usher in this glaringly fascist chapter in America's history. The roots of the Trump, Vance, Rubio regime's corporatist and neoconservative guised as populist takeover was 250 years in the making and made possible by inveterate but often ignored flaws embedded in an American political and social system enshrined into law by real estate barons, many of whom were also slaveholders. The Electoral College and gerrymandering, both of which grossly dilute the political power of individual Americans, deserves special attention when studying the maturation of fascism in American society. Mass media corporations helmed by non-Americans such as Rupert Murdoch and Elon Musk perversely profited off of confusing Americans with a steady diet of culture war claptrap to divide and conquer America's polity. One of the more anti-democratic forces in 21st century American society proved to be the U.S. Supreme Court, which, by the time of Trump's second inauguration in January of 2025, was a supermajority, in no small measure as a result of the 3 justices he appointed to the 9-member bench in his first term in the White House, which was mostly remembered for his administration's late response to the coronavirus outbreak, which led to some of the greatest and most prolonged disruptions in American life in the nation's history, which caused a historic spike in inflation. Project 2025 is the machinery by which the fascists aim to indefinitely hold on to power, regardless of the majority of Americans' wishes. In truth, Project 2025 aims to permit the ruling regime to enrich itself by any means necessary without ever being held accountable for the ravages their policies wreak on the body politic. The fascists taking over American politics and culture are, just like all the most notable fascist regimes of the 20th century, nihilist grifters who see government as a means of acquiring wealth for themselves at the expense of the people the government is meant to represent. The fascists in 2020s America are much like the fascists in 1920s Italy in the manner in which both weaponize religion, nationalism, race, and gender to justify their criminality as the natural order of things. The fascist takeover of America is, as much as anything else, a heist engaged in by a cadre of criminals cloaked in Christian nationalism. It's a naked transfer of wealth from the least advantaged, especially the young, to the most advantaged of Americans. We are living in an age of public self-service in which leaders rob their citizens of a meaningful future by perversely enriching themselves at the majority's expense. Donald Trump has not ushered in this fascist age of crony capitalism. He is merely the end result of a generation of neoconservative ethos having consumed both political parties in the United States. The Democrats abandoned the working class in the last quarter of the 20th century. Both American political parties were, by the year 2000, culprits in the corporatist takeover of American politics and society writ large. Both parties were, by the 2008 economic calamity, overrun by baby boomers raised in the context of a post-war consumer society in which unabashed individualism was gospel. Democrat and Republican leadership enriched themselves at the expense of the generations to follow, concomitant to public trust in government ebbing to historically low levels. The Republicans championed the ethos that government itself was what ailed American society. But both parties had, in the waning decades of the 20th century, become captive by corporate lobbyists. The Supreme Court's Citizens United ruling a decade into the 21st century paved the way for an obscene deluge of private and often dark money to flow into America's already broken political system from some of the darkest corners of the country and globe. Donald Trump's ascendance to the head of a fascistic criminal enterprise that is bent on never, ever relinquishing political power was no aberration. It was, in fact, somewhat inevitable. Donald Trump did not bring fascism to America. Rather, the ascendance of Trump's fascistic regime is symptomatic of a far deeper rot in American society and its polity that needs to be identified, confronted, and addressed if America is ever to truly be what so many patriotic Americans want it to be, a just and verdant society for all, the shining city on a hill it has so often been mythologized to be.